Hello, I'm Anya Lichtarowicz, and this is Somewhere on Earth. We have guests this week in Accra, Chicago, and London. It is Tuesday, the 30th of March 2026. Welcome to the Global Tech Podcast. Coming up today. Imagine this, you wake up, reach for your phone and check the news and nothing. No signal, no Wi-Fi. The world outside is in turmoil, protests, conflict, a political crisis, but your window to the world has just been slammed shut. You are digitally marooned. In 2025, a new report from digital rights access group Access Now and the Keep It On coalition recorded at least 313 deliberate internet shutdowns across 52 countries, the highest number ever documented. From blocking a single social media app to severing the entire fibre optic backbone of a nation, governments are perfecting the art of turning off the lights in the digital world. But for every lock, there's a key. And for the digital age, that key is often a virtual private network, a VPN. The simple technology allows you to route around the censorship, to hide your location, to reclaim a slither of privacy in a hyper-surveyed world. And that brings us to a fascinating contradiction. Here in the UK, the government is currently considering restrictions on teenagers using VPNs to bypass online age checks. They want to limit who can use this tool to protect their digital privacy. Yet a new investigation by TechRadar has revealed that the UK government itself is a heavy user of the very same technology. Multiple departments and public bodies regularly purchase and use VPNs to secure their own networks. So on today's show, we'll look at where these shutdowns are happening, why they're becoming the go-to weapon for governments, and the human cost of cutting millions off from the world. Then we'll explore the VPN paradox, a tool that's both a shield for citizens and a standard issue piece of kit for the state. As the UK government consults on its growing up in the online world plan, we ask, who gets to use the digital backdoor and who gets locked out? It's all coming up on Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast. It's that time of year again when we look at internet shutdowns around the world, and it's no surprise that some governments are using them during conflict, protests and political crisis. A new report from digital rights organisation Access Now and the Keep It On coalition has found that in 2025 there were at least 313 deliberate internet shutdowns across 52 countries, the highest number recorded so far. Researchers say the disruptions range from blocking social media platforms to completely cutting off internet access, often to control the flow of information. The report also highlights a growing trend of authorities targeting alternative connections such as satellite internet. Zach Rossan, Global Data and Research Lead for the Keep It On campaign at Access Now, and Felicia Antonio, the organisation's Global Campaign Manager, are behind the report. I began by asking Zach Rossan to explain what exactly an internet shutdown is.
An internet shutdown is an intentional disruption of internet or electronic communications, rendering them inaccessible or effectively unusable for a specific population or within a location, often to exert control over the flow of information. This can be anything from a full network shutdown to a platform block, and it's any event for our data set that lasts longer than 1 hour. So this is basically something that we're attributing to a specific actor to cut off the flow of information.
So you've reported 313 shutdowns in 52 countries in 2025. So what does that tell us about, the trajectory of internet shutdowns globally?
So we've seen a pretty steady increase since 2020. At this point, there's been over 2,000 since 2016, but we saw a pretty steady rise up through 2019 and then a drop for the COVID-19 pandemic onset in 2020. But it's been a pretty steady rise since then, and in particular, the past 3 years have seen pretty alarming numbers, mostly driven by conflict-related shutdowns. So it's an incredibly alarming increase, and it doesn't seem to be turning the tide back in the other direction.
Now, Felicia, in your global role, perhaps you can tell us where these shutdowns are actually happening.
So our findings show that we documented 313 in 52 countries. Myanmar is the lead perpetrator, with a number of perpetrators imposing these shutdowns in Myanmar. Previously, India has been the lead perpetrator, but for the last 3 years, or 2 years now, Myanmar has become the lead perpetrator, given the military junta as well as the other actors control or urge to control the digital ecosystem in Myanmar, and of course cracking down on fundamental rights amidst conflicts. So we've also seen shutdowns being documented in places like Tanzania, which is the highest number of shutdowns you've seen in Africa this year, from 3 shutdowns the previous year to 8 shutdowns in Tanzania. And we did document brutal crackdown on protesters during the elections in Tanzania. And of course, we've also seen shutdowns in places like Afghanistan, in new perpetrators like Angola, where we've never documented shutdowns, but last year we did document shutdowns happening, and these were imposed to quell planned protests that were happening in the country.
There is certainly a trend, we've discussed this before on the show, that it is war, it is conflict during crisis. We know it happens during protests, during local elections, even school exams. But do governments give a warning? Do they say, hey, by the way, at 2:00 this afternoon, it's all going down? Or is it just like that?
I think it actually varies from case to case. There are some governments that would issue a shutdown order. So, for instance, in places like Uganda, and this was this year actually, when elections were scheduled for January 15th, communications regulator put out an order to shut down the internet 2 days before. Previously, we had seen on the eve of elections, disruptions taking place, or these orders going out. But then this time around, we did even see some tactics where Starlink was asked to disable its services in the country. And so we knew that was a sign that a complete shutdown was going to be imposed. And so some governments would issue orders, some don't. That's rather unfortunate. But we try to document these cases and also understand the context on the ground.
And that seems to be a new trend, doesn't it? Targeting satellite internet systems, something that's not really been seen before.
So we had 4 low Earth orbit internet shutdowns in 2024, and that rose to 14 in 2025. So as people try to reach for alternative ways of connectivity, they live in places where there's constant internet shutdowns or just completely degraded infrastructure. They reach for low Earth orbit internet. They reach particularly for Starlink internet. Whether it's technically legal in the country or not, it's a lifeline for people, undeniably, in places like Myanmar, Sudan, Ukraine, all around the world. And as a result, because authorities like to shut down traditional forms of internet, they also target now forms of alternative connectivity. So this can be through imposing incredibly steep fines to prevent access that way. It can be physical confiscation. In Iran, you can be punished by death for using Starlink devices or smuggling them in. So authorities use kind of new creative tactics because they can't reach for a kill switch, so to speak, but they're becoming incredibly common and really damaging.
And that obviously is a theme throughout most internet shutdowns, isn't it? That human rights debate. You mentioned the severe penalty of death potentially in Iran at present if you're caught using Starlink. Can you give me some other examples of how severe this could be and how severe really, and the impact really of an internet shutdown? Because obviously then there's a lack of documentation, there's a lack of communication with the outside world. What examples can you give me from 2025 that really mark those issues?
Yeah, alarmingly, we did see about 70 shutdowns linked directly to human rights abuses. And this is, we're talking about killings, rape, torture, and other heinous crimes against people. And I think we've seen these shutdowns being used in places like Sudan, where there's a humanitarian crisis amid the conflict. of course, in Israel, in Gaza during Israel's unfolding genocide. We've also seen places like Tanzania, which I mentioned previously, where thousands of people were brutalized and killed by security forces amid a complete internet blackout last year. And so it's really, really concerning that governments weaponizing connectivity to stifle expression and also crack down on human rights in different parts of the world. And this is seen across regions and across many, many more countries, as we've documented over the years.
The use of internet shutdowns and communication blackouts is so common in Myanmar, and it's mostly imposed by the junta, as Felicia was mentioning, on the local level, exactly preceding airstrikes. So people have become to expect an internet shutdown signaling an airstrike. So when you think about like the psychological forms of warfare, basically if communication channels shut down, they can't contact people on their phone, the internet's off, they know an airstrike's coming to their village. And the junta has used this to target civilians, and it's particularly damaging that's an additional form of warfare on top of what is already a lot of targeting of civilians and atrocities. And I'll also add, Felicia mentioned there were 70 such shutdowns that coincided with grave human rights abuses in 2025. There's been at least 241 since 2022, and the Keep It On Coalition continues to try to push for international crimes to consider the use of internet shutdowns to conceal these abuses, because it's incredibly common.
Zach Rosson and Felicia Antonio from Access Now on the internet shutdowns in 2025. There are some positives coming from the report, and you can hear more about them in the Pod Extra version of the show. Please search pod.fan somewhere on Earth podcast. Go to the page and subscribe. For just $10 a month, you can get lots more soap. The UK is considering restrictions on teenagers using VPNs to bypass online age checks, yet the government itself relies heavily on the same technology. A new investigation from TechRadar, a global technology news and reviews website, found that multiple UK government departments and public bodies regularly purchase and use VPN services. The research looked at public procurement records to see how widely the technology is used across official organisations. In most cases, these are enterprise VPNs used as a cybersecurity tool, allowing staff to securely access internet networks and work systems remotely without exposing sensitive data. The findings come as policymakers debate whether consumer VPN apps should face age verification rules under the Online Safety Act. Critics say that while VPNs can be used to bypass restrictions, they're also an essential tool for privacy, cybersecurity, and for people in countries where access to information is restricted. The UK government is currently running a public consultation on the issue called Growing Up in the Online World. Here to tell us more from TechRadar is Sam Woodhams.
We decided to have a look around at some of the kind of government and official public bodies contracts, kind of see which departments are buying VPNs, given that there's kind of quite a lot of debate and scrutiny around the use of VPNs in the UK at the moment, and the government is hosting a 3-month consultation which may see age verification coming to consumer VPN apps. So we wanted to take a look at the state of VPN use by the government and MPs. And yeah, it turns out they're using them quite a lot, and they're slightly different. They're enterprise VPN, so they might be similar to something that we use for work to connect to your office's internet connection, but essentially the underlying technology is exactly the same. We thought this was quite an interesting angle and an interesting kind of experiment to see the kind of multifaceted uses of this technology, which I think otherwise goes quite underreported.
Well, indeed. What are they using the VPNs to look at? Have you got any idea why they would need to have access to a VPN?
Yeah, so it'll be much like a lot of us use them at work. So it will be to secure work from home connections. It will be to secure more broadly people's kind of interactions with the internal intranet, or any other kind of platforms that they have shielded away. So it's more of a cybersecurity kind of tool rather than a censorship bypassing tool, which we might otherwise think of them as. Um, but they are essentially the exact same. It's just which server you decide to connect to, whether that's a office's server or one in another country, which means you can bypass restrictions.
And that does seem like quite a sensible idea, cybersecurity. Let's like not make it very clear as to who we are, where we are, etc., and get that secure link to what potentially is very sensitive information. However, as you mentioned in your first answer, there is a debate going on because now there is a question if in the UK will children, teenagers, be able to use VPNs. Mainly, I think they're concerned about this whole, let's be honest, because teenagers are doing this, children are doing this, they are using unsafe VPNs to get around the Online Safety Act and access websites that they shouldn't be able to access. So tell me a bit more about this whole debate and discussion.
Yeah, so we've seen it kind of globally follow the very similar pattern, which is government introduces age verification. So in the UK, that was with the Online Safety Act, to prevent access to unsuitable material to children. Seems like a very legitimate and good cause. Then I think policymakers find out about VPNs, and that proves to be a bit of a problem because often they can be used to bypass any of the restrictions that they just imposed. The issue then is, how do you deal with the problem of VPNs, given that they are used for what the government might consider legitimate purposes, like their own procurement of the technology suggests, but also these kind of slightly more problematic use cases. And I think we're kind of at a inflection point at the moment globally as well, because there hasn't been a huge amount of resolution to this problem. It's not just happening in the UK, it's happening anywhere that policymakers are introducing age verification. So similar debates happening in Australia at the moment. And we're kind of yet to see how it will play out, whether they decide to introduce age verification onto VPN apps, but that's quite problematic. Whether they go down the route of, say, Russia or China and try to really regulate their use, but that's not a great look either. Or kind of admit that there are going to be certain limitations to their online safety policies. I think much in the same way that people say, you can't buy alcohol until you're 18. They know that some people will have fake IDs, but that doesn't mean that they try and prevent, all printers. And I think there is a similar kind of conversation happening here around this at the moment.
Exactly. And it kind of opens up a kind of a wider privacy issue, doesn't it, really? Because could that potentially, banning VPNs for under 18s, could that undermine privacy more generally, do you think? Do you think that might open a can of worms?
Yeah, and I think the problem is that because they're just targeting one use case, or they just seem to be concerned with one use case, kind of ignoring the other very beneficial uses. So, for example, children deserve to have privacy online just as much as anybody else, and they face many of the same threats, if not potentially heightened threats online regarding their privacy. So actually, their ability to kind of protect and shield their IP address is very important to prevent threats of doxing and having your personal information released online. They are essential cybersecurity tools, and that is both true for children and adults. So any restriction on them could have really negative impact on those kind of more positive use cases.
And obviously we have listeners we know who listen via VPNs because they would not be able to access our content in the country they're living in. And it's also a very important way of people accessing information that they cannot access if there are internet restrictions, and could have an impact on that as well.
Exactly, yeah. So I think then it goes back to the debate that was being had around the initial Online Safety Act and all of these policies is, okay, well, what's the definition of what's harmful to children? And in which countries, different countries take a different approach to that. And in Russia, they block a lot of information just because it's critical of the government. and they have their own way of justifying that. But VPNs in Russia are essential to be able to access information about the war in Ukraine that isn't being blocked by Russian ISPs. So they are both a kind of important privacy tool, but also have a really strong implication for the right to information. And I don't think it's a great look for a democratically elected government to be implementing similar policies seen in autocratic nations.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit extreme. But is there another option?
So I think age verification, even age verification might have limitations. I mean, you could impose age verification on apps within the App Store. That way you'd minimize disruption to legitimate enterprise VPNs. But even then, I think people that want to find ways around these restrictions will find ways around. You could sideload them. You could potentially not rely on app stores. You could download them through other means directly from the companies. And at the end of the day, they're very basic technologies, which actually most people could spin up in about an hour for a relatively low cost. So I think any kind of real type of restriction on them, people will try and find ways round. And yeah, I can't really see an obvious endpoint to the debate.
Absolutely, and it impacts other things as well. Things like advertisers. I know we've been hit because some platforms won't count our streams for advertising from VPNs, and it's a genuine download. These people have heard the adverts. I mean, you can argue that, well, giving them an advert if they're pretending to be in Canada for a Canadian product isn't really their target audience, but it does have impacts. And also they don't know who's listening either, these marketing agencies now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a kind of double-edged sword. And I think for a lot of people, if I'm using a VPN and I get an advert in French on Spotify, then it's quite a welcome break to stuff that seems to know me so well. And it's such highly targeted advertising that actually disrupting that as a consumer can sometimes be quite a powerful thing. That does also have a knock-on impact, and it's not always a positive one. But yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Can we have any influence on this? Can we give our opinions?
Yeah, well, there's a great opportunity at the moment in the UK to actually take part in the consultation. It's called Growing Up in the Online World. And if you Google that, you'll be able to find the government's consultation, which is quite a long survey, and you can choose which bits you want to respond to. And there is a whole section there on VPNs, what age verification implications might be on people's privacy, and also how to kind of improve the Online Safety Act more broadly. So definitely worth checking that out.
Sam Woodhams, VPN Managing Editor at TechRadar. Now, if you'd like to contact us, then please email hello@somewhereonearth.co. And Alex from Kenya did just that. He did label his email no fun. That is noted. He reminded us that we've not asked for listener numbers in a while. Yes, this is our Soap Suds, a unique listener number for you. To apply for a Soap Suds number, listeners must follow the process outlined below. Pick your unique subscriber distinguisher number, which will from here on be called Soap Sud. Post your number and reason to why you have chosen this number on either one of our socials, Facebook, LinkedIn. We are Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast. On other social media, we tend to use the handle @SoapTech. You can also email us, hello@somewhereonearth.co. Your application is then put forward to the Soap Suds Committee. The members of the committee will consist of the presenter, any live guests, and if there are no live guests, a member of the soap production team. Once the Soap Suds number has been allocated, it will be entered into the Soap Suds database. Obviously, this will be GDPR and local data protection law compliant. Alex went on to ask why we've gone from Evergreen to Spreaker. Well, Alex, we need to change podcasting platform as our needs change. Sometimes the podcasting platform itself changes and we no longer get any benefit from being with them. We had initially moved to Podio, which is the leading podcasting platform in the MENA region. However, we met with iHeartRadio, who own Spreaker, and they were keen for us to join them. So after some discussion, that's what we've done. Hopefully you'll be hearing more adverts and we will be earning more money to keep the show going. If you don't want to hear the adverts, then please do subscribe to the Pod Extra. Alex also wanted to ask what happened with covering overlooked tech stories. Hopefully you'll agree, Alex, there's not much coverage about government use of VPNs or banning them in other outlets, and also not much about internet shutdowns. We will look for more stories from places we've not reported from yet too, and do get in touch if you have a story for us. The production manager is Liz Toohey and I'm the editor. Until next week though, bye-bye.